Welcome to the Explainer. So you know that amazing feeling when a long, bitter winter finally breaks, right? The birds are out, the sun's actually shining, and then, bam! Absolute chaos strikes your basement. Today, we're exploring this sudden, often disastrous shift from winter freezes to chaotic spring thaws and figuring out what it really means for our homes.
It brings up a pretty terrifying question, and honestly, it's one that homeowners absolutely dread every single year. Why do sump pumps usually fail exactly when you need them the most? I mean, just picture this for a second. You're walking downstairs, maybe you're just carrying a load of laundry, and instead of hitting a solid floor, you hear that heart-stopping squish of a wet basement carpet just as spring arrives. Literal nightmare fuel, right?
Okay, let's dive into this. Think of this agenda as your roadmap to understanding the unseen mechanical warfare happening right beneath your foundation. 1. The April flooding threat. 2. Spring melt and water pressure. 3. Clogs, debris, and stuck switches. 4. Electrical and backup failures. And finally, 5. Preventative spring maintenance steps.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the April flooding threat, or as it's better known, navigating failure season. April is honestly the undisputed antagonist of our story here. It's got this notorious reputation as failure season because, well, April aligns perfectly with the spring thaw. We're talking melting snow, rising groundwater, and way more frequent downpours after months of the ground being completely frozen solid. It perfectly illustrates why a pump that worked flawlessly all winter long is suddenly completely exposed for its hidden weaknesses.
So, looking at the data, we found that there are exactly 4 main ways a sump system actually dies during this specific seasonal transition. Let's go ahead and break down each of these culprits so we know exactly what we're up against.
Moving on to Section 2, spring melt and water pressure, which is really an invisible war.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer visual contrast. This first culprit is all about just sheer volume and pressure. Think about the stark difference between these two seasons. During the winter, the frozen soil essentially locks up all groundwater movement. It's trapped. But when spring hits, you get this sudden moisture release that causes a rapid, massive rise in water levels. It is an absolute shock to the subterranean environment.
Because that basin is filling up so incredibly fast, this heavy meltwater basically forces your machinery to run a marathon without any training. It quickly exposes marginal pump capacities, restricted discharge lines, debris-filled basins, and it forces much longer, more frequent cycling. Basically, it's working overtime.
Which brings us to Section 3, clogs, debris, and stuck switches. It is a muddy mess down there.
This covers our second and third culprits, which is all the physical junk that just washes in with the thaw. We're talking thawing silt, sediment, dirt, even ice residue. All of this can completely choke the pump's intake. So your pump might technically turn on, but it's moving far less water than you'd expect. And honestly, this risk multiplies big time if your sump is fed by perimeter drains or window wells that funnel in extra debris.
And that leads us right to the float switch. Now, for those who might not know, this is essentially the brain of the sump pump. It's the vital regulating component that tells the pump exactly when to turn on and shut off based on the water levels, and it is incredibly vulnerable to this spring mess. Here's the direct cause and effect of all that. The fluctuating water and sediment we were just talking about directly interfere with this switch. If silt traps that float switch in the low position, well, the pump won't activate at all and your basement floods. On the flip side, if debris traps it high, the pump just runs continuously. It's fighting to drain absolutely nothing, which results in severe overheating and, eventually, a totally burnt-out motor.
All right, on to Section 4, electrical and backup failures. Basically, what happens when the grid goes down?
So, the crucial point is that this is the final horseman of sump pump death, and as we see here, many failures aren't actually mechanical at all. They are entirely electrical. Spring is notorious for severe storms that knock out the main power grid at the exact moment your pump is needed the most to handle that torrential rain.
Now, you might be thinking, hey, I've got a battery backup, I'm perfectly safe, right? Well, surprisingly, that's often a totally false sense of security. Backup systems quietly degrade over the long winter. Whether it's an untested battery, a misaligned switch, or maybe a charging system that's just degraded over time, it might look totally fine on the outside, but then it instantly fails under its very first real heavy demand of the season.
Okay, let's move to and see how this builds into our rescue plan. Section 5, preventative spring maintenance steps. It's time to pivot away from all this anxiety and look at an actionable rescue plan. And the major paradigm shift here is this. Consider treating your sump maintenance as seasonal, not annual, so the system is genuinely prepared for the first major thaw. Preparing your basement is really about beating the season rather than just checking a yearly box. To help with that, here is a highly practical 5-point checklist for you. Number 1, test the pump and the discharge with actual water. 2, check that outside discharge line for any freezing or obvious obstructions. 3, inspect the basin and safely remove any debris. 4, verify your backup battery or generator actually has a full charge. And 5, confirm that the float switch moves freely. Doing these 5 simple things is drastically cheaper and way less stressful than recovering from a flooded home.
Of course, sometimes you really do need backup of the human variety. If during your checks you notice that the pump runs frequently but just can't seem to keep up, or if there are noticeable changes in noise, maybe a weak discharge rate or irregular cycling behavior, do not wait. If you spot any of these warning signs, it is time to tag in a qualified professional before April strikes in full force.
Because look, April's danger isn't inevitable, but it is predictable. Which leaves us with one final, critical question for you to ponder right now. Is your basement ready for the spring thaw? Take the knowledge from this explainer, head downstairs, and go check your own systems before the massive melt begins. Thanks so much for learning with us today.